for more on this, we're joined by Benjamin Newman. He's the Chief Virologist at Texas A&M University. Welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, this long-awaited report, as I mentioned, has found that it believes, at least for now, that the ultimate source of this COVID pandemic that really has crippled the entire world for more than a year now was a bat, which then passed it on to another animal and then on to humans. What do you make of this initial finding? Do you agree with it?
Yeah, that seems to be the most reasonable finding based on the data we have. The conspiracy theories around other possible routes are all based on sort of these almost like a novelization, like what could have happened, what would cause a lot of controversy, what would be a good-looking villain. But as scientists, we have to look at the sequences of viruses, which is their genetic material, and this is the main bit of evidence. There are lots of different SARS-like viruses that are found in bats. Now we know there are, I believe at last count, 1,411 different species of bats in the world. Each of these species may have in the millions of individual members in there. So you're talking about one institute versus, something like 1,000 million or a billion. And yeah, I think 1 in a billion odds would be reasonable if there weren't safety controls in the place at the institute. And so it really becomes more of a 1 in a trillion or just a very, very small chance that it's anything other than this.
That's
Now,
right.
I think the problem, yeah,
I'm
please.
sorry, can I ask you more about that institute? Because we know Wuhan is
Sure.
home to one of the largest infectious diseases labs in the world. And there is this theory that perhaps the COVID-19 virus that we see now did escape from that lab because of a lapse of safety protocols. This report suggests that that is highly unlikely, but it also acknowledges the fact that this investigation isn't over, that it could take some time before we know the definitive source. Are you confident that COVID-19 did not emerge from that lab?
So, whereas they were able to send out a team of investigators, what I think we would need to get to the actual truth is a time machine. And there's just no way to do that. So they can look at the safeguards that are in place at institutes. And frankly, yeah, I'm in one right now. And the Wuhan Institute is decent size, but it's not particularly outstanding in terms of how large it is compared to other facilities around the world, throughout Europe, throughout the United States, many different places. So these facilities are built really carefully, and they have so many different safeguards in place. It would be really weird and rare for a virus to get out, any sort of virus. And then add to that the fact that they didn't have this particular virus at the Institute at the time when they would need to. There's no genetic evidence for it. And so, yeah, based on that, I don't think that's a realistic hypothesis, but there are a lot of bats out there and a lot of individual events. So what we're talking about is probably a rather rare species jump event. These don't happen most of the time, and when they do happen, it's this sort of 1 in a million thing. And so we're talking about, imagine you went to the supermarket, picked up a piece of bad chicken, and then a month later, somebody comes in and tries to do an investigation, or 6 months later. Would you remember? Would you be able to trace it back? Would you still have the chicken in your refrigerator? Almost certainly not. This is the difficulty in trying to go back in this particular way, sort of in a forensic way. The way that I think we're going to end up finding the origins of the virus is by looking in lots of different kinds of animals. Because a virus is never just one, there are always lots of that virus if you have an infected individual and it spreads from one to another. So finding that source, finding which kind of animal has the viruses that are close to this is, I think, in the long term, probably the best way to actually get to the solution. And lots of scientists are working on that. We see new papers on that just about every week.
Well, this investigation, as we know, was led by the WHO, but it did rely heavily on cooperation from Chinese authorities. The Biden administration is just one party that's criticized China for a lack of transparency during this investigation. And as I mentioned before, for some reason that really was unspecified, Chinese officials denied access to the raw data from patients when it came to the Wuhan outbreak. This is a practice that's done in any investigation to determine the source of an outbreak. Are you concerned by the a, perceived lack of transparency at the hands of Chinese authorities?
I think what you're talking about is a general problem, perhaps throughout China at all levels of government, just sort of a reluctance to say or do anything that could make the people who are above you look bad in any way. And I don't think there's necessarily any reason for it here, but I think that is so baked into the way people behave that it would be really sort of almost miraculous to not see that happening. And it'll take a while to slowly open up those things. I don't think there's anything really much more that the investigators could have seen or could have learned. The sort of data that we're talking about is individual patient data, and it's really hard to see what you could get further from a list of particular symptoms. There's no symptom that is specific only to SARS coronavirus 2. And so anything of the type of data that I think we're talking about would not be conclusive, unfortunately. What you would need is a genetic sequence of a virus, and the first one of those didn't come in until early January.
Okay, Benjamin Newman from Texas A&M University. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you again for joining us on the program.